Welcome to GouldFish on Games. Today we're checking out the best sequel ever made. How do I know this? Well, it stars me. So let's check out the amazing Zool 2. Which was made by the Warp Factory and published by Gremlin back in 1993. Once again, I have a few versions of the game, with some very similar looking boxes, with the original Amiga release, the CD32 and PC floppy. It also had 3 other releases, and these included the Atari Jaguar, the Amiga 1200 release, and an updated PC CD-ROM port. So it didn't hit quite the same range of machines as the original. Inside the original box there was the game on a couple of discs, a code wheel which is now plastic and as such isn't quite as worn down, but it works in pretty much the same way, a manual that once again has the story in the form of a little comic, and there would have been some feelies as well. Like before, there would have been a huge poster and a set of stickers. And let's not forget the free lolly, as that's right, the sponsorship with Chubba Chubs is back because Zool loves his lollies. The PC release also got a second manual, as the main one was just the regular Amiga version. The game opens up with another great bit of music, and quickly shows off what's new, as you get to choose who you play as you get to select the hero of the last game, Zool, or the new female ninja who uses a whip, Zooz. And if you had any of the CD releases, you also got treated to a bit of early 90s 3D animations, otherwise it was just straight into the game. Most releases, including the original Amiga, had 6 worlds, with 16 levels. This was increased on the CD32 to have 7 worlds and 19 levels, which is nice that the machine that this was originally meant to be a launch title for got a few extras. As with Zool 1, each level is high concept and weirdly themed, so let's take them in turn and see what they added. We start with Swan Lake, unless you're playing the CD32 game, but we'll come to that world later, which is filled with many swans and eggs, but very few lakes. Zool is still as fast as ever and has all the abilities from the last game, but also has gained a few new ones that we'll check out as we go along. The first big one though is that Zool has been pumping some iron between the games and now can take more hits than ever before, though the number of dots on the health bar does change between the various versions. As there's 2 main characters, there also has to be a few differences, and this mostly comes down to the routes you can take through some of the levels. Zool is hard-headed and can blast through ceilings, where Zooz has sharp feet and can break through special floors. Not all levels have these paths, and some of the worlds skip having them altogether, but it's a cool if not fully rounded out idea. Going up walls also completely changed in this game. No longer do you have to do the jump off and on and off and on to try and climb up, as you can now just hold up and you will climb it as normal. And some of the walls are actually thin enough that you can actually simply climb around them. And while it's not something you can do all that often, it is something you can do in the bird feeders in this world. Most of the worlds will end in a boss fight, and each time you'll be up against Mental Block, though he will change his shape and his attacks for each one. Typically it's just a case of trying to avoid him while trying to pump him full of energy shots. He is quite the bullet sponge. Bulberry Hills is the second world, which has an electrical and light bulb theme, with these sparking walls, lasers that you can walk on, and attacking lamps. Being an early 90s platformer, it also needed to have pipes. You'll go flying around the level in a set path. There are a few moments where you get to pick which pipe you want to go in. Just like the first game, this is still a collectathon. The manual states you need to collect 99% of all the items in the level, though this doesn't seem to quite add up in practice, as I finished some levels where there's been far more than just 1% left over. Even with the enemies dropping items, the math never really seems to add up. And while you can set the difficulty level, that doesn't seem to affect the collection side. It's just the number of lives you have and the amount of time you have to complete it. And as this level has some one-way pipes, you have to be far more careful with your collecting of the items than ever before, as you can get stuck near the end of a level and have to farm the bad guys for more items, which really isn't a fun way to end a level. what is more fun is what happens when you collect 3 of these icons, as it will unlock the 3rd and technically 4th member of the Zool team, Zoon. As you'll get to play this breakout style minigame with Zoon the dog acting as the paddle. Now as you can imagine, this is where you can rack up lots of points as well as lots of lives, as pickups will rain from the sky as you break those blocks. Now you might be able to tell Zoon actually has 2 heads. One side is smart and the other is stupid. Why this is important, I have no idea, but they made a point of it, so I'm letting you know as well. Tooting Commons is the next world, and as you might guess, it has a bit of an Egyptian theme to it. But as is the case with Zool 2, there are elements that make sense, and there's others that are just plain weird. The King Tut style heads? They make sense. The little sphinxes that spit fireballs at you? Yeah, I can get that. Upside down pyramids that attack you? Well, that's getting a bit weird. Icy ramps that end with mummies' heads? Okay, now this is getting quite odd. This level also introduces invisible blocks that are given away by this slight sheen. You can only stand on them if you first shoot them to make them active. At first they're only really used for getting more items, but they become more important as you go. As we can see, the PC version was redrawn with all new artwork. The levels now have far more colour and the background have been given more detail. Zool himself now sports this new shiny leather look, which I'm not convinced was an upgrade. I might just be used to the original Amiga version, but Zool looks as if he's a bit more squat and doesn't look quite right. But this was a massive upgrade from the first Zool, which shows how much the PC platform had changed in just a year. One new ability that we've not talked about becomes very useful in this level, and that is the backflip. If you run at a wall with the fire button held down, Zool or Zooz will do a backflip, which will end up higher than a normal jump. This allows you to access some of the platforms that you otherwise couldn't, and even forms some of its puzzles. Before we continue with the other levels, there is something odd about the Zool release timeline that's worth mentioning, as Zool 2 for the Amiga actually released before Zool hit the 16-bit consoles, with it arriving on the classic Amiga at the end of 1993, with just a month or so later Zool 1 hit the Mega Drive, which would go some way to explaining how Zool gained some of his newer abilities when he hit the consoles, as they were being made at the same time. The rest of the Zool 1 and 2 releases would intertwine each other for the rest of the year, with the final release being on the Atari Jaguar in December of 1994. Snake Pass is where we end up next. The levels are quite short, but you have to deal with a few new level mechanics. The first is the snake, who you have to call at these taxi points, and will travel around and you'll have to try and ride him to get past spike pits and other nasties. But these aren't the only ways you can avoid those sharp points, as you'll also need to walk across these tiles, which will drop down, and then attach themselves to spots further down the level, and make new walkways for you to walk on. This is made harder by baddies that hide in windows and fire homing fireballs at you. Now after the last world, this one actually remembers you got 2 characters to pick from, and actually sets up some alternative routes. Now outside these routes, there are no real differences between Zool and Zooz as far as I can tell. They seem to move about the same speed, have the same fireball attack, and can even jump the same height. The game boasts about Zooz having the energy whip, but I've not really seen any practical difference it's made in the game at all. Mount Ice is up next, and like the last world, it also has 2 unique mechanics to it. First up are these snowflakes that you'll have to shoot to create ice floors that you can walk on. Now they don't stick around long as they will melt, so you'll need to be quick, or you'll have to get used to reactivating them and redoing that bit again. Now these form many of the main puzzles in the world, but it is quite possible for them to vanish just at the wrong moment and you'll end up right back at the start of the level, which is very annoying. And these ice flows form the second unique hazard, as when you land on them you'll lose direct control of the hero, as they will just slide across it like they're snowboarding or something, and as such you'll have to take out the baddies very quickly or they'll get in your way, as jumping isn't all that easy. You do get some limited control at the intersections, so you can guide yourself up and around some of the traps. Thankfully this isn't like most other ice levels, as the surfaces aren't that slippy, apart from the lollipops, but they also look quite grumpy when you stand on their head. They might as well have called this world Mount Product Placement, as we have huge Chubba Chub logos everywhere, though it's not like they've been absent so far through the game, as their logo also holds the game's power-ups, and there are quite a few of them. There are ones from the previous games including invincibility, and the yin-yang dual Zool ability, but there are also a few new ones, including the charge shot, which allows you to fire a blast that will go through enemies and walls, but can only be used when stood still. There's also the health fill, which is a mini Chubba Chub logo, and then there's the bombs, which float behind you and can be triggered at any time to take out everything on the screen, including some static baddies that you can't attack any other way, though they do vanish when you go up against the bosses, which is a bit mean. Now before we get on to the final world, it's worth mentioning the extra one that was added to the CD32, Paper Planes, which has an office theme, with flying papers, staplers for springs, and whatever these blobs are. Being the new introduction world, the levels are relatively short and quite easy, and while it still has 3 levels, it does break from the norm as there's no boss fight at the end of it, it just goes straight to Swan Lake. On top of the 3D animated videos that also showed up on the PC CD release, this also got CD music, which is something we've seen quite often. But it also meant that up to the Jaguar release, this was the only version of the game that got both music and sound effects at the same time. Even the PC version that got a mod player so it could play the Amiga music couldn't manage to have both at the same time. But because the soundtrack is so good, I had to add it in while I was editing it, so you could enjoy it as well. And while the CD32 has a lot going for it, unfortunately this suffers from a huge amount of slowdown, far more than any other version of the game, which is a real pity as it really does affect the gameplay. Mental Block is the final world. Well, it's less of a world and one massive single level, in which you have to make your own path to the exit by breaking through these mental blocks. But with flying books and spinning balls on chains, it's not that easy. It's also made harder by the fact there's no restart points, so anytime you die you have to start at the bottom of the level again and use your route that you've already made. This is made harder by the fact that the power-ups and any other items that you picked up will be gone, so you can't really hope for a quick full life or invincibility. And like every other level, the baddies will still respawn, so you might have to farm some of them to get more health. Eventually you'll meet up with the King Block himself, you'll have to wreck the crown that sits heavy on his head. I've always been a big fan of Zool 2, the crazy worlds, the great music, the extra characters and the interesting levels made for quite the follow-up. Toning down the collectibles and fixing up some of the slowdown would have been a good idea, but they are my only real nitpicks to this game. It's a shame it's not gotten a decent re-release, so second hand is still your best option, though picking a version can be quite hard. Personally, I would go for the original Amiga release. It might not have the fancy backgrounds, but it is quick and I think Zool looks far better in this version, though I think most people would probably go for the PC.
Now I might not have hit as many platforms as I did before. The ones I did hit, I hit hard and I hit fast. So I'm gonna get back to saving the GouldFish from Cruel. So until next time, I was Zool, that was the best game I ever starred in, and this was GouldFish on games.
Thank you for watching my video, I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can let me know down in the comments, or you can use those buttons just below, you know the ones I mean. Or if you're not sure yet, then you can check out 2 other videos that I've done that are on the screen right now. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.